Deception. It's a valuable tool in a tennis player's arsenal. In 1977, 14-year-old Tracy Austin came to her first U.S. Open with perhaps the ultimate deception. For beneath that diminutive frame and teenage smile beat the heart of a fierce competitor, a giant killer in pigtails.
I think at a very young age, I just had this passion for tennis. I just loved to play. To me, it's like a chess game every single time that you go out on the court. You know, this person hits with topspin, this person hits with slice, this is a serve and volleyer. This person gets a little upset easily. This person is tough on every single point. You know, how am I gonna crack this nut? How am I gonna beat this person on a given day? And honestly, to this day, that's still what intrigues me and interests me and makes me love the game of tennis.
Even in today's accelerated schedule and pacing of people's careers, it's almost unheard of for someone to be playing in a tournament like the U.S. Open at 14. But really for Tracy, it was old hat. You know, she was ready.
So you play your first U.S. Open in 1977. You had already won a pro tournament in Portland, but you were still an amateur. Were you ready for everything that goes with being that age and playing at the U.S. Open?
For the most part, it was great. I think because I was just so wide-eyed, I was taking it all in. I wasn't expecting much. I was expecting to play in the first round, maybe win, maybe lose. And then I won, and I kept winning. I beat Sue Barker, who was 4 in the world, I think, in the 3rd or 4th round.
It was 1977, and she was this 14-year-old in the pinafore and the pigtails, and she was just such a refreshing, just a kid, but of course she was a killer underneath it. But she looked so darling. Last U.S. Open over there, she sort of skipped her way onto the quarterfinals.
Tracy became the youngest quarterfinalist in U.S. Open history at that time. It was a momentous achievement, marked by a notable event. Is that when you got a phone call from the president?
I did, and I'll never forget that locker room at Forest Hills, I think because of that phone call. I was just kind of wandering around, and my brother Jeff and John were playing doubles out there, so my mom just kind of I mean, how can you just wander around a U.S. Open now? You can't do that. But at Forest Hills, you just kind of wander around, and somebody said, well, the president's on the phone for you. And I was like, oh, yeah, right. You know, there's no way. So I didn't rush over because I thought there was no way. Finally, I realized that they were serious, got on the phone, and it was President Carter. And I'm sure that it must have been like pulling teeth to get anything out of me. I was overwhelmed, and I wasn't very talkative, but it certainly was, was very special.
Her performance was worthy of the high-profile attention, but there were still lessons that the 14-year-old amateur would have to learn at the Open.
Then I came up against Betty Stova, who's 6'1", 6'2", I don't know, but that was
quite a contrast.
Quite a contrast in the heights, and that's where it stopped very quickly. I hadn't seen balls like that unless they were playing my brother. You know, these serves coming down from a different altitude that I was used to, and the pace with which those winners were flying by me was very different.
Really, it all begins for these great champions with focus. To be able to go out there on the court, no matter what the stakes are, no matter what the conditions are, no matter what the location is, and to be able to focus with absolute determination, keep your mind on a job at hand, watch that ball, hit strokes the way you know how you can. Tracy gave a demonstration of that in her very first U.S. Open.
Well, her play and her performance certainly proved that she deserved to be there and that she was talented enough. It was pretty clear from her early appearance that she was going to be a champion. It was just a matter of when.
People saw Tracy coming from a long, long way away. And you know, Tracy Austin was the prodigy who started the trend in a sense. She scared the dickens out of everybody, and she was fearless. She was one of the most feisty players ever. Tracy just would get out there, and she was like a little cat. You know, she was just ready to pounce on any ball that came her way. She was tough.
At the 1979 U.S. Open, Tracy Austin was seated 3rd. Just ahead of her loomed 2 tennis superpowers. Chris Evert had been winning Grand Slams since 1974. Martina Navratilova had just begun her own grand ascent. Though Tracy had beaten each by this time, this was, after all, the U.S. Open. So 2 years later, you're no longer the kid that no one knows what to expect from. You're 16 years old, and you come in with a real resume to the U.S. Open. How different was it in 79 than 77?
Well, in 77, I think I went there with no expectations, just happy to be in the U.S. Open, you know, happy to be entering Forest Hills and playing anybody that they put in front of me and hoping to win. In 79, my expectations were high. They were different because I had beaten Chris, I had beaten Martina, I had won many tournaments. You know, I was at the top of the world, and not number one, but I was in that mix. And so I definitely came in with different expectations. But I just went in with a good amount of practice, a good amount of conditioning. I felt that I was, you know, stronger and could handle Martina's power a little bit better. I'd always had the mental toughness, but that was the part that was missing.
I remember how quick and how agile and how composed Tracy was. I thought she'd be intimidated, and she wasn't. I thought Martina was far physically superior, and it just didn't turn out that way. Tracy just wore her down.
I think it was a good, solid match, typical match that we would have where she's serving and volleying. I'm trying to come up with the precise passing shots and the right lobs, and I played a really good match, a really solid match.
Sixteen-year-old Tracy Austin is in the finals of the U.S. Open.
Martina was a world-class player. Tracy Austin was 16 years old. I mean, that was the phenomenon of all phenomenons.
Nobody gave her a chance, or much of a chance, certainly against Martina. The fact that she beat Martina shocked everybody, all of us, the broadcasters included.
Tennis, like all sports, is always on the lookout for that next great player. If we're lucky, they come along when the present great player is still in their prime. The 1979 U.S. Open Women's Final would pit the 16-year-old Tracy Austin against her idol, Chris Evert, with a shot at history on the line. The night before the final, when you're playing Chris in 1979, what's going through your mind? Your life's about to change. This is a huge moment for you. Are you nervous?
I had no idea that if I won that match, I was going to beat Maureen Conley's record as the youngest U.S. Open champion. I had no idea that Chris had won it 4 times in a row. You know, I had no idea what a big deal it was going to be. And I remember seeing a quote from Chris later where she said, you know, I just figured when I walked out on the court that she would be much more intimidated than she was. And I wasn't. I mean, I went out there, I wasn't thinking about the 14,000 people that were in the stands. I wasn't concerned about whether they were going to be rooting for me or whether they were going to be rooting for Chris. I wasn't concerned about where my mom was sitting. I wasn't concerned about which side of the umpire chair I was going to sit on, you know, because that's a big deal to a lot of people. What I was concerned about was I had my pink dress on, and that was my lucky dress, and I felt prepared. I felt mentally prepared. I knew I had beaten her before, but I also knew that it was going to be a long day, meaning any time that you played Chris, it wasn't going to be easy because she doesn't give you one free point.
Chris said of you after that final, Tracy's mental strength was scary. She had no weakness. She was obsessive about winning. Was that accurate? Is that a good way to describe you as a 16-year-old in the final of the Open?
I think so, and I mean, I take that as a compliment. I was very, very focused, and I think I had to be. I mean, I'm up against Chris Evert, who's the queen of women's tennis, the queen of America's tennis as well, and I had to be that focused and that concentrated just on the small picture in order to beat her.
I think there was a lot of resistance to Tracy when she first came on a tour because Chris and Martina were pretty much owning the world at that time, and they don't like this newcomer coming along. She unnerved Chris terribly because Tracy was a little bit of a Chris clone. You know, she had modeled her game on Chris. She looked up to Chris. And being a kid of, 14, 15 years old, she didn't think that, well, gee, an older player is not really going to take very well to me, modeling myself after her or saying she was my role model. It's a little like, go find your own identity, kid.
It was a very frustrating feeling because I didn't feel like I had any answer for her. She was steadier than I was. She was concentrating better. She was hitting the ball a little bit harder. And I remember thinking, how am I ever going to beat her? Because she's only going to get bigger and stronger and better.
I can remember Tracy just crushing Chris Evert, actually even forcing Chrissy off the tour for a few months in the late 70s. I mean, Chris Evert just needed to take a break because of Tracy Austin.
Chris Evert was a queen of American sport, and Tracy was sort of the darling to come along, but at that time people were still so in love with Chris that I think it a little bit rocked the tennis world.
Those back-to-back wins over Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova that Tracy posted to become the youngest champion in U.S. Open history, I mean, those speak for themselves, basically. She took two of the most dominant champions, a woman who basically had maybe the greatest rivalry ever in sports, male or female, and handled both of them in that. And for a young girl of that age to have that sort of self-possession and to be as focused and dedicated, not just to beat one, but to beat both of them back to back, when each was such a big accomplishment, it just really identified and showed what a blue-chip player she was.
Tracy Austin proved that pigtails were worthy of holding a Grand Slam crown. She had overcome long odds to get to the top.
Tracy came on full bore. Tracy came to do business, came to play the tournaments. She didn't kowtow. She didn't find her place in a pecking order that very often happens in women's tennis. Tracy had none of those issues. She was there to win tournaments. She didn't care. She didn't care to make friendships or special relationships or to have any deference toward these players. And she basically scared the living daylights out of both Chris and Martina.
Where 1979 brought Tracy Austin her first great triumph on tour, 1980 would bring her first great disappointment when she failed to defend her U.S. Open title, losing to Chris Evert in the semifinals. She would also miss the early months of 1981 because of a back injury. But in late summer, she returned to form and found herself back in the U.S. Open final once again.
The 1981 against Martina, you came back from 6-1, losing in the first set, to win in 2 tiebreaks. Is that maybe the greatest match you've played on a big stage?
It was possibly the greatest mentally. It was not great tennis because it was not a pretty day. I was so excited to be there, and I was a little bit more understanding about being in a Grand Slam final and what that was about, and particularly because I had been out for 5 months earlier that year with a back injury. So it was already the beginning, kind of the first injury of what was to end my career. I didn't know that at the time, but I had already made a strenuous comeback, a big comeback. So just to be in the final, I was very excited, but I wasn't happy just to kind of go out there and play a match and lose. I mean, Bill, I lost that first set 6-1 so badly. She killed me so badly. It was embarrassing to be out there, and I could have just kind of packed it in that day because tactically, she had a big advantage when it's that windy. A net rusher should have that advantage because she's 6 feet from the net, and I'm 25 feet from the net, and I'm at the baseline, and I've got to try to come up with these precise passing shots, particularly in the wind, and these precise lobs that are blowing every which way, and get it by her. I don't know how I had the mental wherewithal to kind of hang in that match. And I will say at that time, 1981, that Martina was still fragile in some ways. I mean, we know that she was fragile mentally. She still would get flustered with conditions and with situations, and had never won the U.S. Open, and seemed to always be a little agitated in New York, bothered by the crowds and bothered by the noise and bothered by the congestion. And she really let the wind and the conditions bother her when she should have said, yes, I got the wind. I've beaten her 6-1. She's not even in this match. And I just stayed positive. So that really was the difference in that match, was that I had a better attitude out there. Eventually worked my way into the third set tiebreak. And I mean, I think about that now and I gasp. Are you kidding me? We're going to play a tiebreaker for the whole U.S. Open for the rest of my life. I'm either going to be, second place or the winner just for this one tiebreak.
Another forehand volley down the tube.
1-0 Austin. I think I hit 3 winners forehand down the lines to her forehand, where the whole match I had been trying to break down her backhand. And obviously she felt that she needed to cover that side. I just felt that I saw an opening there and whipped 3 winners up that side.
A winner from the backcourt. You don't see that very often.
She was still a little fragile emotionally, and we all could see that. Every person in the crowd could see that, because by 5-1 up in the tiebreak, I think the tears were already starting to come. She got down 6-1, her serve, missed the first serve, lots of tears already. Double faulted at match point, I won. And I think that the crowd really embraced Martina because they could see that fragility.
What a terrible disappointment for Martina Navratilova.
That was the championship final that Martina had lost, and the fans, of course they adored Tracy, but they showed Martina for the first time such a glorious reception, and it was really very profoundly moving.
I think the frustration that Martina felt, because I think a lot of shots she thought she had won, a lot of points that she thought she had won, and Tracy would run them down.
The tenacity of Tracy Austin overcame many challenges on the court, but it could not overcome a recurring back injury that would make this her last Grand Slam final appearance.
Looking back, given how great Tracy Austin was, I'm glad she won that second U.S. Open in 1981, and because 2 majors kind of makes somebody's career just that much more special. And, Austin was good enough if her back hadn't given out and if she could have had a long career. I mean, Tracy Austin was good enough to win, closer to 10 majors, but just the way it worked for Tracy. But, again, she won those 2 U.S. Opens early.
At that point, 18 years old, your future still very much in front of you. I can't imagine that you thought, I'm not going to have this again.
Of course I did. I mean, not only never be in a U.S. Open final again, but never another Grand Slam final. And basically out of the game within 2 years. And when you think about it, at that time, I was right in the mix with Chris and Martina. I mean, that rivalry might not have ever been the rivalry that it became. It might have been a trivalry.
3 of you, right.
3 of us playing. And so, you're right. I never once thought that would be it. And it was way too young to be it. And
the U.S. Open has seen many great sights and many great players. Tracy Austin was both a great player and, as a young teenager, a sight to be seen. A young but fierce competitor, she rose so fast, challenged legends for supremacy and won, only to disappear off the mountaintop seemingly as quickly as she had arrived. It is a tantalizing tale that leaves.
15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
Hi, I'm Bill McAtee. Tennis Channel knows a lot about delivering the best in tennis coverage year-round, and that's why we're proud to partner with DirecTV.